For the first story, I'll take you to Ocean City, Maryland, summer 2017. Growing up, summer trips to the boardwalk were the highlight of my year. But that summer, something happened that I'll never forget. The scent of salt water and fried food, the neon lights flickering against the ocean waves, and the distant laughter of strangers created a sense of nostalgia that felt safe, almost untouched by time. But in the summer of 2017, I learned that even the most innocent places can hold something dark, something that lingers beneath the surface, waiting. That year, my friends and I decided to take a last-minute trip to Ocean City. It was supposed to be a weekend of nothing but cheap beer, late-night arcade runs, and lazy mornings on the sand. The first day was perfect. We spent hours at the boardwalk, stuffing ourselves with funnel cakes, playing rigged carnival games, and riding the old Ferris wheel that creaked with every gust of wind. As night fell, the crowds thinned out, leaving only a few stragglers walking along the wooden planks, the sound of their footsteps swallowed by the crashing waves. I wandered off from my friends, drawn toward a small, dimly lit souvenir shop near the end of the boardwalk. It was one of those places that seemed forgotten, with faded postcards, dusty trinkets, and racks of tacky t-shirts that looked decades old. The shopkeeper barely acknowledged me as I stepped inside. Something about the place felt strange, as if I had walked into a different time. As I ran my fingers along the edge of an old snow globe, I felt it, the sensation of being watched. A prickling unease crept up my spine. I turned my head just slightly, catching movement in my peripheral vision. Outside, through the shop window, a man stood at the edge of the boardwalk, completely still. His posture was unnatural, rigid, his head tilted just slightly as if listening for something. The dim glow of the nearby street lamp cast shadows across his face, obscuring his features. Something about him was deeply, deeply wrong. I told myself it was just some guy, maybe drunk, maybe lost. But the way he stood there, unmoving, sent a pulse of fear through me. I stepped away from the window and pretended to browse, but my hands were shaking. When I finally turned back, he was closer. No sound, no footsteps, just there. My breath hitched in my throat. I couldn't see his eyes, but I felt them. The shopkeeper must have noticed my discomfort, because he muttered something under his breath, a tone of warning, almost as if he recognized the man outside. I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. I bought the cheapest keychain I could find, just to have an excuse to leave, and walked out without looking back. The moment my feet hit the boardwalk, I forced myself to move casually, as if I hadn't noticed him. I had this terrible, gut-wrenching feeling that if I ran, he would too. I spotted my friends a few yards away and made a beeline for them, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. I told myself once I got back to them, I'd be fine. I didn't look back until I reached them, and when I finally did, he was gone. Relief flooded my chest, but something still felt off. The spot where he had been standing wasn't just empty. The wooden planks were wet, slick with water, as if someone had just climbed out of the ocean and stood there, dripping. But the beach was far below, the railings too high for anyone to easily climb up. I tried to shake it off. I convinced myself that I'd imagined the whole thing, that my mind was playing tricks on me. We spent another hour at the boardwalk before heading back to our hotel. I should have felt safe inside, with the door locked and my friends asleep just a few feet away. But I didn't. Something wasn't right. That uneasy feeling clung to me, a whisper of dread I couldn't shake. I told myself it was nothing, exhaustion maybe. I closed my eyes, willing myself to sleep. Sometime in the night I woke up. A sharp, gut-wrenching instinct pulled me from sleep, and for a moment I didn't know why. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. But something was wrong. My skin felt cold, my breath uneven, and then I saw it. The hotel door. It was unlocked, just slightly ajar. I had locked it before bed, I was sure of it. My blood turned to ice as I sat up slowly, my eyes darting toward my friends, both still asleep. The air in the room felt wrong, heavy, like someone had been there, like someone was still there. I didn't move. I couldn't. I kept staring at the door, my pulse hammering in my ears. And then, just beyond the sliver of darkness in the hallway, I heard it. A single wet footstep. I never moved so fast in my life. I slammed the door shut, locked it again, and dragged the heaviest chair I could find in front of it. My friends woke up groggy and confused as I stood there shaking, listening for anything else. But the hallway was silent. I barely slept for the rest of the night. When morning finally came, I checked the hallway before stepping out. The carpet outside our door was damp, small puddles leading away toward the stairwell. We left that morning. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to explain something I couldn't even understand. But before we got into the car, I glanced back toward the boardwalk one last time. And there, at the farthest point, just at the edge of the rail, I swear I saw someone standing, completely still, watching. For the second story, I'll take you to Brighton, UK. Autumn 2018. Growing up near the boardwalk, it was always a familiar place. Wooden planks, crashing waves, and blinking neon lights. But that autumn, something happened that made it feel anything but familiar. It was a place filled with childhood memories, of seagulls stealing chips, of arcade games that never let you win, of the carousel spinning endlessly, its haunting melody carrying over the cold sea air. But that familiarity turned into something else entirely the night I saw the boy. I'd gone out for an evening walk, something I did often to clear my head. It was late, past 10, and the crowds had thinned to just a few lingering figures. An elderly couple shuffling along, a group of teenagers laughing near the arcade, a street performer packing up his things. The air had a sharp chill to it, the kind that hinted at the coming winter. I walked along the railing, watching the dark waves roll in, listening to the way they crashed against the pier's wooden supports. And then, somewhere behind me, I heard it, a laugh. Not a normal laugh, but something high-pitched, unnatural, stretched out like a recording played at the wrong speed. I turned my head sharply, but the boardwalk behind me was empty, just the glow of flickering streetlights and the endless row of shuttered kiosks. I swallowed hard and kept walking, brushing off the unease. It was just the wind, or maybe some drunk kids fooling around. But a few steps later, I heard it again, closer. I turned fully this time, my pulse quickening. That's when I saw him, a small boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old, standing near the entrance to the carousel. His clothes looked strangely old-fashioned, like something out of an old photograph. Worn suspenders, a white button-up shirt stained at the collar, and trousers that looked 2 sizes too short. But it wasn't his clothes that made my blood run cold, it was his face. He was grinning, not a normal child's grin, but something stretched too wide, too unnatural. His lips curled up in an almost grotesque expression, his teeth too small, too uniform, as if they weren't real at all, and he was staring at me. I felt my stomach twist, every instinct telling me to turn away, to pretend I hadn't seen him. But I couldn't. My body was frozen, locked in place as the boy slowly lifted a hand and waved. It was slow, mechanical, like a wind-up toy going through the motions. My breath caught in my throat. Something about the way he moved wasn't right. He didn't blink, didn't shift, just kept grinning, kept waving, as if waiting for me to do something. A burst of laughter exploded behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding. The sound had come from the arcade, but the group of teenagers was gone. The machines still blinked. The stuffed animals still stared blankly from their glass cages, but the place was empty. I turned back toward the carousel. The boy was gone. The air felt wrong, heavy. I needed to leave. My legs finally listened, and I turned toward the parking lot, moving faster than I probably should have. Every step felt too loud against the wooden planks, my breathing sharp in my ears. The boardwalk had emptied too quickly, the once lively atmosphere swallowed by the creeping cold. I reached my car, fumbling for my keys with shaking fingers, glancing back toward the pier. And that's when I saw him again, standing directly under a street lamp, closer this time, still grinning, still waving. I yanked open my car door, practically throwing myself inside. My hands shook as I jammed the key into the ignition, my heart hammering so loudly it drowned out everything else. The headlights flared to life, illuminating the pavement ahead. I hesitated, my breath coming in quick gasps, and against every ounce of common sense, I looked up at the rearview mirror. He was standing right behind my car. Closer than before, his too wide grin still stretched across his face. I slammed the gas pedal, the tires screeching against the pavement as I sped out of the parking lot, my stomach twisting into knots. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I drove straight home, locking the doors the second I stepped inside, my skin crawling with something I couldn't shake. The next morning, I convinced myself I had imagined it, that it was a trick of the light, exhaustion, some prank played by a kid who knew how to get under people's skin. But as I scrolled through the local news, a headline caught my eye. Brighton Pier tragedy, remembering the boy who vanished. I clicked the article, my hands trembling as I read. 30 years ago, a boy matching the exact description of the one I had seen had disappeared from the boardwalk. His parents had reported him missing after he wandered away near the carousel. Witnesses claimed they saw him waving at someone near the edge of the pier. His body was never found. I stared at the screen, my breath coming in shallow gasps. My stomach twisted as I scrolled further down, my eyes catching on an old grainy photograph attached to the article. A little boy in suspenders, grinning, waving, and staring right at the camera. For the last story, I'll take you to the Gold Coast, Australia, summer 2020. The boardwalk had always felt like a second home to me, but that summer, something happened that made it feel like a place I could never return to. Long stretches of sand, the sound of waves crashing against the shore, and the neon glow of the amusement rides flickering against the night sky. It had a strange charm to it, a mix of old and new, a place where families gathered during the day but left behind eerie silence at night. I'd been going there since I was a kid, and even in my 20s it was still my favorite spot to clear my mind. But after what happened that summer, I haven't set foot near it again. It was a humid night in late December, and the boardwalk was nearly deserted. I had stayed later than usual, lost in thought while watching the waves. The air smelled like salt and fried food, but there was something else too, something musty, damp like rotting wood. I told myself it was just the seaweed washing up under the pier. The carnival had shut down for the night, and the only sound was the distant hum of a few stragglers heading toward their cars. I should have left then. I should have gone home, but I didn't. I wandered toward the edge of the boardwalk, stopping near an old set of wooden steps leading down to the beach. A rusted sign hung from one of the posts, warning people not to go underneath. The wood had been eroding for years, unstable and unsafe. But as I stood there, I heard something strange. A whisper. It wasn't the wind or the ocean, it was something else, something low and breathy. I turned sharply, my pulse spiking, but there was no one around. Just the dimly lit boardwalk stretching behind me. I told myself I was imagining things, that the sea breeze had played tricks on my ears. But as I took a step forward, I heard it again, closer. My stomach twisted as I looked down at the dark space beneath the boardwalk. The gaps between the wooden slats revealed only darkness, a void that seemed to stretch deeper than it should. That's when I saw it. Movement, just for a second, a shifting shadow, something crawling just out of sight. My breath hitched, and for a moment I couldn't move. Then something scraped against the wood. A long, deliberate drag of fingers or claws along the beams. Every instinct in my body screamed for me to leave, but I couldn't. I was frozen, staring into the blackness beneath the boardwalk, waiting for whatever was down there to show itself. And then it did. A hand, pale, too long, the fingers stretched impossibly thin, curling around the edge of one of the wooden beams. The skin looked damp, almost translucent, like something that had been soaking in the ocean for far too long. My chest tightened, every hair on my body standing on end as I took a slow step back. The hand twitched, then another one appeared, and then a face. I wish I had never looked. It was human, but not. Its skin was bloated, tinged with a sickly bluish hue, the way drowned bodies look when they have been in the water too long. Its eyes were black, empty voids that locked onto mine with unnatural precision. The mouth stretched into something that wasn't quite a grin, but a mimicry of one, a grotesque attempt at an expression that didn't belong on something like that. And then it whispered. Not words, just a sound, low and rasping, like the final breath of something that had been holding it in for far too long. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body wasn't reacting fast enough. The thing under the boardwalk shifted, dragging itself forward, its hands gripping the wood, its body contorting in ways that defied logic. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't asking me to leave, it was calling me closer. The world around me blurred as I finally turned and ran. I didn't look back, I couldn't. My feet pounded against the boardwalk as I sprinted toward my car, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I fumbled with my keys, throwing myself inside and locking the doors in one frantic motion. My hands shook as I turned the ignition, my headlights flaring to life, illuminating the empty parking lot. Empty. But I knew it wasn't. Something was still watching. I forced myself to drive, to leave that place behind. My pulse didn't slow until I was miles away, And even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had seen something I was never meant to. The next morning, I did something I wish I hadn't. I searched online for any incidents near the boardwalk. A few missing persons reports, tourists who had wandered too close to the water at night and were never seen again, but then I found something worse. An old article, decades old. A fisherman had discovered a body washed up near the pier, bloated and unrecognizable. The article mentioned an eerie detail. The body had no eyes. They had been taken, removed. I don't go near the boardwalk anymore, because sometimes, when the wind is just right, I swear I can still hear the whispering, and I know it's still waiting. Boardwalks are meant to be places of joy, laughter and memories. But beneath the flashing lights and ocean breeze, something else lingers, something watching, waiting, hiding in the dark corners where no one dares to look. Some people vanish without a trace. Others see things they were never meant to. And a few of us are left with memories we wish we could forget. But the real question is, what happens when the boardwalk watches you back? If these stories gave you chills, share and subscribe for more terrifying true horror stories. And don't forget to hit the bell icon, because the scariest things happen when you least expect them. Stay safe. And whatever you do, don't go alone.